Now, the hit drama scoop about the infamous Newsnight interview has put Prince Andrew back in the headlines. Well, my next guest is the British journalist who kick-started his downfall back in 2010 after capturing those photos of him alongside Jeffrey Epstein.
The allegations surrounding Jeffrey Epstein include his friend Prince Andrew.
Sam, let's start pushing the palace. I want it for us. 2 chairs, 6 feet apart. It's like a Western. Make no mistake, if we don't get the tone right, the story won't be him. It'll be us.
Well, journalist Annette Witheridge joins us now alongside our royal editor, Russell Myers. Good morning to you both. Annette, thank you for being here. And what has unravelled and unfolded since that picture was taken is just extraordinary. And you were a journalist living in New York in 2010 at the time. How did you manage to acquire this now infamous shot?
A lot of hard work. It was very cold. I had a tip-off that Andrew was in New York. He was there privately, and the newspaper wanted to know what he was doing. So I think night one, I thought, oh, Ghislaine Maxwell, they're good friends. He'll be with Ghislaine. So I followed Ghislaine all over town as she socialised everywhere. Nothing. The next morning was Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. I went to Jeffrey Epstein's. I didn't honestly think he'd be stupid enough to stay there because Jeffrey Epstein had been, had been to prison. He was a sex offender. But as I arrived on the street, I heard British accents. I always say men talking into their cufflinks like this. And it's like, that's the Royal Protection Squad. So I knew somebody was there of great importance. So Jay Donnelly, the photographer, and I then sat there. And on the next day, the Sunday, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, suddenly the door opened and Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew walked out, which meant that Jay could actually rush off, into the park and manage to take the pictures. It wasn't easy.
No, and we see this. It's actually the opening scenes in this new Netflix movie, Scoop, and it's you in the car with the photographer, and exactly as you say, this sort of rush to the park to try and get this snap, which really, looking back now, there's no doubt that it was a major catalyst to the cards tumbling down afterwards. It really was the first step in this story in many respects. It was confirmation that there was some form of friendship between the two men.
I think if we hadn't got that picture, Andrew would have continued to deny any friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. It was incredible. I mean, at the time, it was just a job. It was a very cold December weekend. It wasn't like the greatest job I'd ever done.
So you had no real understanding in that moment just how important it was going to be?
It's almost like that story or the picture just grows and grows. I had no idea just how big.
I mean, Virginia Roberts, as she would have been then, but Virginia Giuffre had been unwilling to speak, hadn't she, until this photograph emerged?
Yeah, she had a new life. She had a husband, she had children. She'd gone to Australia. She got away from the whole sort of Epstein circle. She did not want to talk. But when she saw that picture, she was so furious that Epstein particularly was like rehabilitating himself.
And what did you make of the drama now, having watched it, having seen your role played out in as well? What did you think about the reenactment of the whole story? Is it true enough to form, do you think?
It's totally true to form. I mean, there were funny things, like I would most certainly not have been constantly on the phone with a photographer. They'd have murdered me.
Yeah.
That said...
We see him running through the park, supposedly on the phone to you, but as you say, that wouldn't have been exactly the truth.
No, I would have left him to do his own photograph, and I was just very relieved when we met up afterwards. It's like, look at this, oh. But the rest of it is fine. I mean, I loved it. I'm terribly flattered. I have a beautiful Shakespearean actress, Kate Fleetwood, playing me. It's great, and it's very much true to life. The tensions you can see there, the joke, I mean, sort of, I didn't fall asleep in the car, honest.
Of course. And this will all make sense when people watch it, because there's just those little moments that they did try to perfect to create this sort of realistic sort of reenactment.
It kind of worked because it was like, OK, you were showing that we were there one day, and then it became night, and then it became sunrise again. So it's a kind of lovely way they did it. And I love the rest of the film. It's a great film about journalism, and it's about holding, the rich and the powerful to account.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened. Russell, I know you've watched it as well at this point, and it's uncomfortable to watch at times, and I can only imagine how uncomfortable it is for anyone connected to the royal family and indeed Prince Andrew.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you talk about, it was really interesting listening to Annette there, because it's often the baby steps towards a big story that, you know, often go unnoticed. And certainly the telepathic relationship between photographers and journalists until you're getting further and further to potentially a big story. And sometimes they don't work out, and sometimes they end up telling the world something they don't know. And that's the fascinating aspect of what happened to Prince Andrew. And it was Annette's dogged journalism, I suppose, in terms of revealing this story to the world. And certainly Prince Andrew and the palace would have had an easier time had that photograph not emerged.
And also, Russell, I thought it was quite interesting just watching the workings around Prince Andrew, the press secretaries, the dealings with journalists. That's very much your world.
Well, it is. I mean, certainly there would have been a review of practices after he took part in the interview, and I imagine they will do things very, very differently in the future, because we know now, and certainly dramatised in Scoop, about how he was sort of bombastic, how his own personality got in the way of making the decision of whether to do it, whether to not. And it's interesting that we see there were press secretaries who were absolutely adamantly against him doing the interview. They thought it would expose him to a world of issues that he didn't need to be exposed to, and yet he still went ahead with it. And I suppose the rest is history.
Yes, very much so. And of course, the insight into the sort of cutthroat nature of a newsroom.
Yeah, well, listen, it is a dramatisation. Is it very interesting when we're sort of listening?
Is it?
Well, there's often a buzz around the newsroom. And like Annette said, it's often the small steps towards a big story. But when you finally land that one piece of information, as journalists, you do get a buzz to reveal something that the world doesn't know. And certainly this was happening in the Newsnight interview, in the newsroom when they were talking about it to the Director General, how they would actually go about it. It's definitely the thrill, I suppose, of why people got into journalism in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And Annette, you do feel like this is just a very important story to tell, and we're continuing to do so with dramas like this.
I think it's absolutely the world needs to know what happened. I mean, we don't want bad people to sleep easy at night. You know, investigative journalism, it costs a lot of money, but it's worth it because it is holding people to account.
And indeed, watching it back, though, you felt quite emotional.
I felt terribly emotional. I didn't expect to. It wasn't just me and seeing me. That's incredibly flattering on screen. It was all these incredible women, very brave women, from like Virginia Roberts, you know, right up to everybody at the BBC, everybody fighting to get this, you know, we're all women. And a whippet, according to the film.
Absolutely, exactly. What do you think of Prince Andrew now and his future role?
I think Prince Andrew's life has changed beyond recognition. And I think his future, he needs to keep his head down and perhaps devote himself to charity. He should be doing good works. He shouldn't just be wasting his time, you know, riding horses in Windsor, watching television or whatever he does. Yeah, he needs to, you know, he needs to do good work, charity.
Well, like we know, Russell, and we've said it many times, Prince Andrew has done and continues to strenuously deny any of these allegations made against him. That still stands, of course, but we are still talking about this story, and that's just not a comfortable fit, unfortunately.
Well, it's not, and it's you know, it's never a good time for the royal family to be discussing this scandal once more. But of course, there are going to be millions of people who are going to watch the series or the program Netflix, Scoop on Netflix, and then of course there's another one on Amazon in just a few months' time. And I think the issue for Prince Andrew is, as Annette says, to not be putting himself front and centre for the royal family. We saw him kind of leading the royals at King Constantine's memorial just a few weeks ago. That didn't go down very well at the palace. It wasn't received well from the public. But, you know, who is going to work with him? There's not going to be charities queuing up to work with him at all because he's so toxic. His relationship with the royal family just is quite fractured still. And I think the relationship with the public is even more so.
Very interesting times, Russell. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Annette, for coming in and telling your side of the story. It's so fascinating. And of course, you can catch Scoop. It is out now on Netflix.